Welcome everyone to this SAGE webinar marking Pride Month 2022. I'll just give everyone kind of 15 seconds to log on. I know it takes a little bit of time when you're logging onto a Zoom for things to pop up. So I'll let everyone join. And then once everyone's hopefully coming in from all over the world, because we've got lots of people signed up and we've got a great panel from across the globe. I'm going to run through a few housekeeping things before we start the actual webinar itself. Okay, let's go for it. So first things first, we are recording today's webinar. That means that all the panelists' talks will be recorded, and also the recording will be sent out after the event is complete. There'll be time at the end for a Q&A, so you can submit your questions using the Q&A chat box throughout the panel, and our team are busy looking at that, and they'll be sending me the questions to look through at the end. So I hope everybody's joining and can hear everyone okay. So let's get going. My name is Gemma Ware. I'm a journalist and podcaster based in London for The Conversation, which is a not-for-profit organisation which works with academics to get their research and expertise out to a wider audience. And for my day job, I co-host and co-produce The Conversation Weekly, which is our global podcast. And today we're talking about, this webinar is about expressions of LGBTQIA plus joy, celebrating self, community, media and art. So as we celebrate Pride Month, we're recognising the vital role that self, community, art and media play for the LGBTQIA plus community and their allies. And during today's discussion, I'm going to invite our panelists to share their views about how LGBTQIA plus joy is expressed by drawing on their own experiences, in work, society, history, and on their own personal experiences as well. So first of all, let's go around our virtual Zoom room to find out about each of our panelists. And we're going to do this in alphabetical order by last name, just to make it all fair. So Jonathan, please could I start with you?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Alexander. I'm professor of English at the University of California, Irvine in the United States, and I am delighted to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Jacob, I think you are next.
Hi, I'm Jacob Bloomfield. I'm really happy to be here. I am a Zukunftskolleg postdoctoral fellow at the University of Konstanz in Germany, and I'm also an honorary research fellow at the University of Kent, and I'm working on two books right now. One is on the history of drag performance in Britain between 1870 to 1970, and also a separate project on the musician Little Richard.
Great, I'm looking forward to hearing more about all that. And Julian, if you want to go next.
Greetings, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you wherever you are. I'm Julian Cavanaugh, assistant professor of dance and choreography and gender and sexuality and women's studies at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, in the United States. Loosely, I'm working on a book right now, tentatively titled Black Boundlessness, Ethics, Performance, and Aesthetics Under Duress, that offers a kind of theorization of the freedom practices that my Black interlocutors use to bring about meaningful, living a meaningful life in a world that tells us routinely that our lives are wholly devoid of meaning. So very happy to be here today to talk about one of my favorite subjects, joy.
And we're interested in hearing what you have to say as well, Julian. Thank you. And last but not least, Rosie.
Hi everyone, my name's Rosie Nelson and I use they, them pronouns. I'm a lecturer in gender at the University of Bristol and I'm a sociologist by trade. My research is largely revolving around bisexuality or other identities who are sexually or romantically attracted to more than one gender. And I also look at gender broadly defined, particularly trans and non-binary identities. And as a sociologist, I am currently writing a book on bisexuality, community, and relationships. So how bisexual people navigate spaces around them in love, friendship, and family.
Okay, great. Well, welcome to you all. We're going to get going. I think what we want to talk about in this webinar is joy and joyous things, but we will obviously talk about kind of some of the issues that can raise in this community too. So First of all, I'm going to start with you, Rosie, because you were the last person to introduce yourself. In what ways has your work brought out or celebrated this sense of LGBTQI plus or queer joy? Perhaps you can tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So my research at the moment, as I said, is involved in looking at bi people and their relationships to friends, family, and lovers. And that has brought a lot of joy because it has been a matter of sort of acknowledging some of the barriers, but ultimately looking at how bi people forge lives for themselves that are sort of uninhibited with all of the sort of burdens that society tends to try and build around them. So, you know, there are a lot of sort of hurdles to overcome, but for many of the people that I spoke to in my research, because I conducted interviews to sort of inform the book, then people had really talked about the beauty and joy of being bi quite a lot in terms of finding kinship, finding friendship, finding partners who understood, and sort of navigating all of that, as well as the importance of good representation. So it's sort of, it's a lot of themes that come in the research. In terms of sort of the work I do on a more day-to-day level and how joy comes out through that, I find that because I teach a lot of university courses and I'm sort of quite open about the research that I do and quite open about my own identities as a non-binary and bisexual academic, that can actually bring lots of very interesting conversations in the classroom and spark lots of moments of understanding among students when sort of someone is able to teach them about some of these spaces or conversations and so on. But one of the things that I get the most joy out of personally is actually doing events like this, you know, sort of speaking on panels and in conferences and with peers and the public and so on and so forth. And that's something that's quite a big function of my job, which I really enjoy. And I think often having these kind of spaces is an excellent way of bringing that joy, connection, kinship, and everything that I've referred to. So thanks for inviting me to be on the panel, essentially.
Well, that's great. Julian, I saw you nodding along there. Did you recognize some of what Rosie was saying?
Oh, for sure. And I think that we're in alignment here in terms of, I guess, my relationship to joy, I think comes often through both my practices, my own practices and those of my interlocutors of who many are in my community, right? So I think what's really important to understand joy for somebody like me and many of my interlocutors, you really do have to understand, and I'll preface this by saying, I repeat, I am not an Afro-pessimist. However, there are three things that come from Frank Wilderson's understanding of social death that really, really, really are important, that provide the context for why a kind of pursuit of joy for me is really, really important. So when we think about the constitutive elements of social death, Wilderson theorizes that there are namely three of them. One is natal alienation, being that, you know, Black people, because of white supremacy, because of capitalism, patriarchy, and their collusion, if you will, have been natally alienated. So it means that the way that we are able to form kinship structures and kinship relationships is wholly different than what would be the case in a kind of normative kind of society. So that's one thing that I think gives important context. The second is gratuitous violence. And gratuitous violence means the ability to have unspeakable acts of violence done toward or on a Black body at any time, for any reason, and to have a lack of justice often being done. I mean, we know this already. You look on the news anywhere you are, and you're likely anywhere around the world, not just in the United States, but you're likely to see a Black body being brutalized. We need not say much more about that. The other thing is general dishonor, where even after the grave or beyond the grave, Black bodies are subject often to a kind of what they're calling a kind of dishonor in memory, right? And in practice. So I think that those are the kind of elements that Black and brown, queer, trans, and non-binary folks are always having to articulate our own understandings of joy in light of. And this is why, for me, joy is a practice. It is a practice that is very much intentional, right? Because the world tells folks like me so often that our lives are wholly devoid of meaning that we have no reason or nothing to celebrate. When, you know, many of my interlocutors who come from the ballroom community, okay, actually provide some of the most, and continue to provide some of the most important kind of cultural contributions to the world writ large, right? We wouldn't understand what shade is. We wouldn't understand what a key is, right? We wouldn't understand what it means to spill the tea, right? Or to share the tea, right? Without folks in ballroom. So I think for me, it's really important to honor, both understand the context out of which joy emerges as a kind of practice, as much as we understand the practice itself.
That idea of intentionality behind it is really, it seems so important in this context. Jacob, what about you? Is there any of your teaching or your research? How have you brought out this sense of joy in your work?
Yeah, thank you for your question, and thank you for having me on the panel. So one example of this is in my book on drag, which is not published yet. So it's a figurative book currently, intangible. But I sort of start out with this account of a drag show, and I talk about the jokes that they tell at this drag show, and a bit of a warning: the jokes are bad. So, for instance, one of the jokes is there's a scene with these two drag artists. They're playing mermaids, and that was a common trope in drag shows at the time. Mermaid sketches, they used to be called. So one of the mermaids says, "Well, it wasn't me who was appearing in that notorious seaweed nightclub last Saturday." Then the other responds, "Well, as a matter of fact, I did a wonderful dance there, wearing only 12 beads." To which the other mermaid responds, "Yes, and 10 of those beads were perspiration." And then another joke in the show is about sex work and cruising for sex and drag. So the joke goes, "She went out with a pole and came back with a check." Like, double entendre there. So why do I tell these not very good jokes? I think it's to push back a little on this narrative that people expressing gender nonconformity in the past were always these, you know, hyper conscious freedom fighters. And to some extent, you know, that's true, but we should also address the full spectrum of human experience in queer history. And part of that human experience involves triviality and joy and just people telling silly, bad jokes, just as we all do.
I love that idea of triviality and how that can bring joy as well, for sure. Jonathan, what about you? What does this kind of idea of joy mean to you in your work, and how have you been kind of exploring it?
I've just been enjoying this conversation so far, hearing folks from so many different walks of life and parts of the globe talk about what brings them joy. I really resonate with what Rosie, Julian, and Jacob have been saying, particularly the Julian's idea of the intentionality of joy. Joy is practice. I've long called this the pursuit of diligent pleasure. And I mean diligent in that you have to work at it, that it is something that we keep having to do for all of the reasons I think that Jacob, Rosie, and Julian have been talking about, when there are so many forces seemingly aligned to rob us of joy. I think one of the great things that queer and trans people gift to the world is that diligent pursuit of joy, not just in the face of adversity, but in the face of what Audre Lorde calls our litany for survival, right? The fact that so many people wish we hadn't even been born. Then what do you do? It's like, well, the only way, you know, someone once told me, the best revenge is living well. And I think that living well is not only a great gift we give ourselves, it's a great gift we give to each other, and hopefully if people are paying attention to the world, because it's what we desperately need. With that said, I want to think about this, because when I think about joy, I often do think, like many of all of you, I think about the work that I do. And I've been so fortunate to work with SAGE over the last many years, and we're about to produce the 4th edition this coming August of our book, Finding Out, An Introduction to LGBTQ Studies, which has been a total joy to work on, even when it's been really difficult. It's been a great joy to work on because it is full of the history and is an amazing reminder of all the ways in which queer and trans folk have really pushed at the boundaries of what's possible, of what our species can imagine itself being and becoming, creative and inventive ways of not just surviving, but of forging new forms of relationality and community. It's just the sheer creativity of our histories is extraordinary. But I also want to pick up on something that Jacob was talking about, the value of the trivial. I think we are all trained in highly neoliberalized cultures to value our work as the primary source of pleasure. You know, and I have to admit, it's been a devastating couple of years. I don't know about you, I'm sort of PTSD'd from the pandemic. And I want to spend some time this summer being trivial. I want to spend some time just, you know, being silly and stupid and not being consumed with work, while also recognizing the great privilege of being able to do so. But I think those of us who can need to be able to take care of ourselves and recognize that embracing some non-work at times is also opens up possibilities for joy. So I'm just having a good time being here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. I love that idea of kind of trying to be more trivial. We should embrace the trivial. I might put that on my to-do list for the summer. I mean, a couple of you have mentioned there this idea of kind of the history and the creativity of our histories. But what do we think about whether joy has been a kind of an underappreciated or even an underexposed part of that history? Does anyone want to come in on thinking about that?
I mean, I'm happy to
Yes,
start as the social scientist. You know, so as a sociologist, so much of my work is focused on sort of solving problems or adjusting, you know, trying to influence policy or trying to get sort of different programs in place, which means necessarily focusing on the negative. You know, it's my approach to research and the work that I do is that it should be transformational and it should contribute something. And that's always my intent, which means, you know, in my particular discipline, that I have to focus on the bad things. I have to focus on the issues. I have to explore the negative side, of which, you know, there are many barriers, which we could talk about. But that means that these moments of joy, whether they're sparks or longer term, you know, situations that people are able to build for themselves, or those kinship connections, often do get under-recognized, I think. So I know that there's an increasing amount of work being done, for example, on gender euphoria to try and respond to this, because so often then there's a focus on how gender can be limiting or difficult for people who are trans and non-binary. So experiencing gender euphoria can be a transformative act of rebellion in some ways, or act of coming to oneself, which is understudied. So I would say that broadly speaking, there's a growing attention to these moments of joy, particularly because they can actually show us what works and what we need around us. But definitely from a sociological perspective, I think that there's room for a lot more conversations about the things that bring happiness and fulfillment for LGBTQ people.
Yeah, absolutely. Jacob, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, first of all, I think if you look at the history of the discipline of queer history, it sort of starts out with a lot of discussion of the laws, most of which involves oppressive laws, medical discourse. This is all stuff Foucault is concerned with. So joy has been sort of pushed to the sidelines from the very beginnings of queer history as a discipline. And secondly, I think, and I would argue unfairly, and secondly, I think often joy and happiness is just seen as kind of superficial and not as deep or complex as sadness. For example, I was reading a review, for instance, of the most recent Lorde album, and this does tie into what I'm talking about. It's not just a diversion. And they were saying, oh, we miss this album is too happy, basically. We miss when Lord was sad. It's sort of this idea that artists always need to, in order to write a really deep album, you need to show that you're struggling. You have to be a struggling artist. You can't be happy. And I thought that was sort of sad. And, a lot of, for instance, disco, a great queer art form, often sort of seen as, again, unfairly, seen as not artistically credible because it's, in part, because it's so joyous. So I think joy can be complex, and joy deserves to be scrutinized just as much as sadness does.
Definitely, we should all appreciate disco far more than it is right now. Jonathan, what about you? You've obviously been writing this kind of study of and a history, I guess, of this. So, what about your work on looking at these narratives? Do you think the sense of joy is missing, or how have you tried to kind of bring it back through into your work?
It's a great discussion along these lines, because I think that we are right at a moment where people, there's scholars, academics, public intellectuals, I think we are wanting to take joy and its correlatives like creativity and imagination and even desire a lot more seriously than we have been. I love the idea. We need a disco studies. Jacob, there's got to be something like that out there, right? But I'm also thinking of sort of the amazing historian Saidiya Hartman, who wrote Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, her most recent book, which is an extraordinary accounting. It's a deeply historical work that is about these figures that have sort of been lost to history from the early 20th century, mostly in colors of community, queer colors of community, people whose focus was on imagining and creating lives, as she puts it, that were beautiful experiments, that were about not just surviving difficult homophobic and transphobic and deeply racist circumstances, but finding the resources, the collective resources of creativity and imagination in order to live beautiful lives. And that laces our history. I think there's so much in queer and trans history that shows us that, and we forget it because we get caught up in these progress narratives that it's always going to get better. Well, it only will get better if we continue to make it better. And that's where I come back to the idea of being diligent, or to Julian's idea of practice, that we have to keep making our lives beautiful in a lot of ways. I've got more to say on that, but that's good for now. So,
okay, Julian, what about you? What about this idea of where this fits into the practice and where this history and has the joy been missing, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that, and I hope everybody can hear me a little bit better. I took my fab earrings off, okay? So we should be all right. I think that what's important to say about joy in this context and how it might be underappreciated, I think largely comes because, the way that we have been taught to conceptualize queer life, right, is through rupture, is through a particular kind of violence, right? And I'm thinking about the work of Marquise Bey and Black trans feminism, where they're really thinking about how our attachments, if you will, to gender and our demand that we produce particular kinds of Black trans feminist epistemologies and ontologies really becomes a difficult process in large part because these histories are often emerge through violence. So, and for me, I think it often allows us to forget just how we as humans are relational beings. So what do I mean when I say that? If there is violence, there must then also be a particular kind of joy that emerges. And I think that because we are relational, we can't know what is good, what is beneficial without also, sitting with and grappling with what is, bad. And I don't want to, reduce everything to a dichotomy, because it's certainly much more complex than that. And I think that perhaps one of the kind of complexities about thinking about queer joy, right, is how oftentimes it does not announce itself as some kind of spectacle. I think, especially when we're thinking about queer life, we're so used to the spectacle, right? That when queer life articulates itself in a rather mundane or tacit kind of way, we have a lot more difficulty recognizing that. This is why, I'm so bent on illuminating particular kind of practices, because I do think that, in this world, freedom for myself and my interlocutors is very much a kind of practice that we do in order to bring and render our own lives with meaning in ways that may or may not be recognized or recognizable or legible in particular kind of ways. So, I'm really thinking here, and I know I agree with Rosie in here, thinking about non-monogamy, right, as a kind of freedom practice, thinking about multiplicity as a kind of freedom practice, thinking about transmutation or an orientation towards embodiment that really allows us to shapeshift, if you will, to be more than one thing at any one time. So those are a few of the ways that I'm then thinking about queer joy and how we might reveal the particular practices that have been underappreciated or not seen at all.
Okay, I like that idea that there's kind of tacit moments of joy that don't have to be kind of a performance or there for just everybody to see. They're just part of everyday experience, and they still count, and they should be appreciated for sure. But obviously, we're talking about expressions of queer joy today, but it's not always an easy idea to navigate, and I think particularly at this moment that we're living through, and even this week actually. So how do you think we should actually balance those expressions of joy against, say, the political and societal obstacles that are put in place for those in the LGBTQIA plus community? It's not always easy. So how do we navigate that? Does anyone want to jump in there? Rosie, do you want to have a go?
Sure. I think it's hard. I think it's really hard. There is a lot going on. We've just come out of, well, we're not even out of it. We're still in a pandemic. Roe versus Wade has just been overturned in the UK. Then there's huge, deep-rooted debates around space and gender and who can go where and who counts as what. And there is a growing concern that I have around some of the debates in political spheres and the things that are happening on social media, that we can't ignore, homophobic, cisnormative, biphobic, transphobic conversations that are sort of becoming quite prominent and also becoming, it's in some institutions we're seeing it happening. I think it's very difficult to balance joy against that. I think it's very heavy to try and find the joy through that. I often have times where I have to turn off social media, not look at the news, and just go and do something that's more grounding, sort of be with the people around me or do something creative myself, or, exist in my space at that moment, because hearing everything is overwhelming. I think that that's one way to find joy, is to focus on what is actually right in front of you and who is actually right there with you. The idea of connection and kinship can solve a lot of immediate issues, should we say. I think that there's also something here about joy can be a revolution. We are told certain ways to be, or restricted from certain spaces, or there are conversations around us, and being joyful and in ourselves, proper pride as protest is a huge thing that we can lean on, in terms of, if we continue to live lives where possible that are full of joy and celebration, that is a political standpoint from my perspective. That is saying something against the barriers that we're seeing unfold around us and continue and persist from histories of anti-queerness as well. But I'm keen to hear what other people think as well.
Yeah, Jonathan, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. I really, really appreciate Rosie's commentary about this. As many of you probably know, it's been a challenging weekend here in the United States for radical and progressive thinkers and for many people. And so it was interesting when we got the news on Friday. what we decided to do. We were not planning on going to our local Pride Day parade on Saturday, in part because I'm old, and sitting in my studio and making my art is more joyful for me than many other things. But we decided, let's go. We're absolutely going to go, in part because we wanted to be with other queer and trans folk. We wanted to show solidarity with women. We wanted to share joy, and it was an amazing moment of allowing ourselves the opportunity to be with other people, to be with a number of queer and trans folk and queer and trans allies, and just share in that sense of solidarity. And it reminded me of something that Rosie was getting at, that the part of the difficulty is that sometimes we think of joy and everything else as sort of binaries, right? It's like either we're joyful or we're working hard on all the difficult things. And the reality is that, as Julian was talking about relationality, that these things are often in very complex relationship to one another, that there's a way in which the difficulties actually perversely point towards new possibilities for joy. They show us not only where we need to push to embrace joy and to create joy and to practice it, but they can open up ways to think about where we need to do that work to create more opportunities for creativity, imagination, and pleasure. So we sort of have to take that all together as part of the complexity of queerness and trans experience. But maybe better to lean into that than not. I don't want joys just to come to me. I'm willing to pursue them, and perhaps we pursue them best when things are difficult.
Julian, what do you think about that? This idea, it's a very, very heavy moment for the community, and how do you navigate that that difficult that balance, I guess?
Yes, it is definitely a very heavy moment for all those birthing bodies, if you will. And I do think that, the decision really is, a yet another assault on not just birthing bodies, but bodily autonomy. So for me, one of bodily autonomy writ large, right? So I think that one of the most important kinds of things that I may offer in this conversation is perhaps attention towards fugitive kind of practices, where that are not built on a particular kind of legibility. For me, you all might not know, but my previous kind of career was very much invested in making the lived experiences of queer and trans people legible in the eyes of the state. And I feel like I've done a 180 now, because I feel like there's a lot more potential and a lot more meaningful life that can come through, that emerges through fugitive kinds of practices, right? So thinking along, the lines of somebody like Saidiya Hartman, right, whose examination of, quotidian Black life it's not a spectacle, but it's really important to theorize how people who have been long-time fugitives or understood to be long-time fugitives still make meaning of our own lives in ways that may or may not, come under the auspices of the state. Do I think that people's practices will change now that the precedent has been wiped from under us? I think that they are always changing, and I don't think that those who want to remain having a bodily autonomy will find creative ways to do so. That's just my orientation toward thinking about this. And for me, thinking through ideas of opacity, thinking through ideas of transmutation, right, are really, really, really helpful in that they allow us to move beyond seeking the state for redress of grievances. I've already accepted that will likely not ever come, certainly not in my lifetime. And I'm still very much intentional about creating a life that has meaning for me and the people who I love, who are in my kind of kinship connections and networks and communities.
Yeah, Jonathan, I saw you put your hand up there. Did you want to come in?
I didn't mean to put my hand up. I was looking for the love button.
Oh, the love button. We should all have that. I wish I knew where that was too.
I love it. I absolutely love what Julian has been talking about. I think that's right.
And Jacob, what about you? This idea of how do you balance this kind of where we are with this moment and this this desire perhaps to express joy and to celebrate it, which is what you do in your work and your histories, but also perhaps kind of engaging with kind of how marginalized the reality is of life for many people in the community.
Well, just a secret to the audience members out there, we did get some of the questions in advance, so I was able to think about some of these things. I'm sorry to ruin the magic, but this also corresponds to what others were saying. I was thinking when presented with this question about really intense moments, specific moments when joy was expressed. And, you know, I had to think back initially to the Stonewall riots, where, you know, obviously quite intense, people were angry, but people were also chanting and dancing and smiling. The famous "We are the village girls, we wear our hair in curls" chant during the Stonewall riots. In my research, I talk about a couple of cases, one being the Bolton and Park case in the 1870s. Two men in London who were arrested while in drag for the great sounding crime of conspiracy to commit sodomy. They were conspiring. They hadn't done it yet. They had a spreadsheet or something. After they were acquitted, cheers erupted in the courtroom. People were saying bravo, like it was a drag show or something. I was also thinking of the Holland Park case, also called the Lady Austin's Camp Boy case, where police raided a drag ball in London in December 1932. And I just thought it was worth reading a passage from Matt Holbrook's great article on this case. This comes at the point when Lady Austin and the men in drag are being, or the people in drag are being arrested. And the passage starts, the MC of the Holland Park ball dances was a 24-year-old barman living nearby in Barron's Court, Austin S., more commonly Lady Austin. During the police raid, Austin asked Inspector Francis if a passing man was a detective. He was, and Austin commented, "Fancy that, he is too nice. I would love him and rub his jimmy for him for hours." When Francis cautioned him, Austin replied, "There is nothing wrong in that. You may think so, but it is what we call real love for a man. You call us Nancys and bumboys, but before long, our cult will be allowed in this country." So even while they're being arrested, Lady Austin is making jokes about giving the cop a hand job and imagining a future where their cults will be allowed in this country. So, you know, even during particularly intense moments, specific moments like Stonewall, like when Lady Austin and Lady Austin's camp boys are being arrested, there's room for joy, and joy can be quite powerful, as Rosie mentioned.
Yes, this idea of avenues for joy, even in kind of the darkest moments, I think is really fascinating, and that history is so great. I should just say to everybody watching, if you've got any questions for the panelists, please do pop them in the Q&A, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end. We'd love to hear what you're thinking and what the ideas we're talking about have raised in your mind. Move on to kind of looking at, you know, where can we find more joy in our lives? So are there any media outlets or social media accounts, people we should follow right now, or artists or people in the community that personally bring you joy? Julian, do you want to kick off here, or people you think we should know more about?
Yeah, so there are two people who bring me an abundance of joy. One is the inimitable Fatima Jamal. You can find her on Instagram at FatFemme, FACFEMME. And the one thing I love about her joy practice is that it is ephemeral. I think this is another one of the aspects of joy, at least in my understanding, that is really, really, really generative. Where, of course, I think that we often joy is articulated as some kind of, something that is always there, that is always present, that you just have to search for it. Sometimes some of the most joyful things are moments, right? They're ephemeral. They come and leave as quickly as they come, and they can leave, traces for us to remember. But but Fatima, in my mind, has such a dynamic joy practice. So, you could get on her Instagram and see, 15 different posts, and then the next time you go look for her, you see nothing because she's scrapped everything and it's doing something totally different. So I love her. Also, there's a lovely podcast called Black Matter, done by a dear friend, Chaz, Dr. Chaz Antoine Barracks. So you should be able to find it, Black Matter Media. It's their entire kind of like scholarly practice is one about articulating queer Black joy. And I think they do an excellent job of engaging some of the messiness, engaging some of the contradictions, engaging some of the complexities, if you will, of Black queer life. So those are a couple of people who, allow me to engage in a raucous kind of laughter and really, really interesting kinds of conversations about a number of topics. So those are a couple of folks that always, always, always give me so much joy.
Fantastic. I don't know about everyone else. I'm scribbling all this down. So, and I'm hoping going to get some more recommendations here. So, Rosie, do you want to? Hopefully, you've got some extra other people we can go and search out.
Well, I've got one that's probably quite a few people will already know about, which is I've just introduced my partner to Alison Bechdel. Well, not in the flesh, but the work of, it's been really enjoyable to see them engaging with it because Alison Bechdel just released a new comic book on like a graphic novel comic book on sports and movement, and it's just wonderful work. It's just really good fun. So that's something that's currently hot on the bookshelf, and also quite honestly, memes. I know that this is part of their I can never say this word, get ready, ephemerality of joy is as Julian was saying, is memes. It's sort of come across my social media feed. I've no idea who posted them. I can never find them again. I always forget to screenshot, and it's always something very relatable and joyous, or sort of poking fun at some, it's sort of that laughing at the face of oppression thing sometimes, which can be joyful in terms of that union and rebellion in community. But yeah, so memes and comics is where I'm at right now, honestly.
Memes and comics. I need more of that in my life. Jonathan, what about you? You must be. You said you said you're an artist. You're in your studio. So have you got any artists or any other people we could go search out?
Sure, all sorts of things. I just want to put another plug in with Rosie for Alison Bechdel, who's absolutely wonderful, and her early work, Dykes to Watch Out For, which has unfortunately maybe been eclipsed by her more recent memoirs and work. But Dykes to Watch Out For was absolutely crucial for many of us in the 90s, and just in terms of being able to find, it was published in LGBT local newspapers and kind of put out, and it was just a wonderful way to just learn about the broader LGBT community. And so I absolutely there. I have loved following on Instagram Pamela Sneed, the poet, who's been since the pandemic developing this amazing art practice with watercolor and collage, doing some extraordinary stuff. Just and she's someone who's just, the only word that comes to mind is majestic. Just somebody who sort of embodies what we've been talking about. So much of her poetry is really about, on one hand, the pain of having seen so many of her brothers and sisters pass from AIDS during the 80s and the early 90s. So she's deeply rooted in and grounded in the history of that moment of the early AIDS epidemic. And yet I don't know of another poet writing today who has such vivacity, such just sheer joy in just embracing life and just kind of exuding a pleasure in being here. And part of that, I think, is built on having recognized that the cost of being here for many of us is pretty high. So we've paid a heavy cost for it. So we damn well might as well enjoy it. And I absolutely love that about her work. So easily foundable, easily for her to be found on Instagram. So check her out.
Fantastic. I like that idea of just the pleasure of being here and celebrating that. I should say that someone's asked a question. We are going to write all these suggestions down and put them in the email that you're going to receive at the end in a few days after this panel finishes. So don't feel like if you've missed someone that you can never find them again. It shouldn't be as ephemeral as all that. Jacob, have you got any people you can recommend, people we should be following, places we should be going to kind of, to get a bit more joy in our lives?
Places. Well, I'm going to be in Athens soon, so everyone can join me in Athens if that's the place you want. But yeah, I mean, a lot of my sometimes I feel like a lot of what I write is basically celebrity gossip about people who are only celebrities to me, who have died in some cases hundreds of years ago. So there are lots of figures that come to mind, but I'll mention three. One person is James Bidgood, a director who sadly passed away earlier this year. And last year marked the 50th anniversary of James Bidgood's film Pink Narcissus. And if you haven't seen Pink Narcissus, it's sort of like if David Lynch directed a gay porn movie. So I recommend that people see that and check out James Bidgood's work to mark his passing. He was a great queer elder figure and a beautiful artist. I would suggest in terms of queer joy, a person named Jenny June, also known as Ralph Werther, the writer of a memoir called Autobiography of an Androgen. And this is basically an account of cruising in turn of the century New York. And this person's cruising adventures usually didn't go well. Usually the people who they tried to pick up just robbed them or something. But nonetheless, they maintained a sense of optimism throughout it all. They would do stuff like go to the local military barracks and sing songs for soldiers they thought were cute. God knows what these soldiers thought of this interesting person. So Jenny June, also known as Ralph Werther. And then the last person I'll mention is someone who I've been looking at a little bit contextually in terms of my research on Little Richard. And that's a drag performer named Sir Lady Java. Sir Lady Java was is a Black trans drag performer. They were also an activist figure, sort of almost forced into activism because the city of LA was clamping down on drag and threatening their livelihood. So with the help of some celebrity friends like Red Fox, Sir Lady Java protested this injustice and also had other celebrity fans such as Lena Horne. And if you can look at back issues of Jet magazine online and look up Sir Lady Java and see some great photos. And Jet magazine was sort of seemed to be occasionally obsessed with following Sir Lady Java's career. So those are three people I'll mention: James Bidgood, Sir Lady Java, and Jenny June, aka Ralph Werther.
Fantastic recommendations, everyone. Thank you so much for kind of doing that, for bringing that to all of our attentions. It's fantastic. Before we get into any questions, and as I should say, please do put a question in the Q&A if you want to get it answered. What's bringing us all joy right now? What are we watching? What are we listening to? What are we loving? I just finished, which is a bit mainstream, but I just finished watching Heartstopper, that Netflix show, which made me cry with joy, and also just so much happiness that there are shows like this being made for young people today. But what about you guys? Rosie, you said you seem to say you liked Heartstopper too, but what else are you loving right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So here in Bristol, it's currently starting the Pride season. So just around the corner from my house, and there's an amazing cinema that's doing a film festival. They do it every year. It's called Queer Vision. So that's bringing me a lot of joy. There's an amazing bookshop that's opened up very nearby that's also got a big focus on gender and sexuality themes. But actually, all of this is, sorry to bring it back to the pandemic, but just being out in the world again is bringing me joy. Being able to sort of meet up with friends and go and do things that don't involve, I don't know how many people here in the UK, but the Zoom pub quiz is really, really, I never want to do one ever again.
They suck the joy out of life.
Yes, I never want to think about trivia again, and I used to be a big trivia person, but yeah, so being able to go out and meet people and have that kind of thing is really a pleasure. And also something that I won't shut up about, to the fear of my friends, is the fact that I've just joined my local library for the first time since I was a child, and it's really great. I didn't realize you could get audiobooks from your local library and so on. So I'm just there pretty much daily checking out a new book, which is bringing me a lot of joy. And also, it's too geeky of me, but I have to admit it.
Nothing's ever too geeky. Jonathan, what about you? What's bringing you joy right now?
Yay for libraries. Love libraries. I think that's wonderful. God, so many things. Of course we love Heartstoppers, so it's just delicious. Something that's similar here in the US, a series that just ended called Love, Victor, which I think was actually pretty smart at times about some of the different ways in which overlapping queer communities struggle to find relationality, make common community, and find love and joy. And I'm sorry that it has run its course after 3 seasons, but pretty smart, I think, about that. I will also say that one of the things, and I'd love to hear Rosie talk about this at some point too, one of the things that I particularly found joyful about Heartstoppers is the sort of opening up of sexuality, desire as exploration. There have been far too many narratives that are just about you are or you aren't. You are this or you are not this. You're gay, you're trans, or you're not. And I love the narratives, and I really give a lot of credit to a show like Heartstoppers to kind of saying, well, actually it could be a little more complex than that. We can work on our identities. We can work on discovering who it is that we are. We can embrace a bioerotic approach to life, and that's wonderful. That's amazing. That's the kind of queerness that I think many of us have been fighting for all of these years. Is not just to have a set of identities that are then granted rights, but to embrace the right of ongoing self-determination wherever that might actually take us. That's the most joyful thing that I'm seeing in a show like Heartstoppers, and it makes me really, really happy.
Rosie, did you want to come in on that? It's because it's very related to your work.
Yeah, just that, as a bisexual scholar, and, a huge amount of issues within sort of bisexual work is this idea that you're forced to one category or the other. No one believes you, no one trusts you, everyone thinks you're cheating on everyone, all of this stuff. And so everything Jonathan was just saying is very relatable. And I think I agree that it is something that's coming out in new media now, which is this idea that sexuality can be a journey and not just a destination, that identity is fluid, it is flexible, and things adjust. So yeah, just super relatable.
Great. Jacob, what about you, other than going to Athens, which just sounds joyful because it's such a great city? And what else is bringing you joy right now?
Yes, I'm going to Athens for, I've heard of that Greek love, so I'm looking to experience that. I'm woefully unhip in terms of my media tastes. The last piece of queer media I watched recently, though, was very good, but it's 100 years old, or nearly. It's the 1923 film adaptation of Salome with Alla Nazimova. It's often deemed to be or credited with being the first kind of, at least American art film. It's the set design and costume design incorporates a lot of Aubrey Beardsley's work, so it's very aesthetically impressive. And if you go on, I just looked, if you go on the Wikipedia page for the 1923 Salome, there's a whole section on gay cast rumors. So you should only ever watch films if they have a gay cast rumors section on the Wikipedia entry for the film, in my opinion. So yeah, 1923 Salome, great watch. And I'm pretty sure it's available on YouTube because it's in the public domain.
Fantastic recommendation, thank you. And Julian, what about you? What is kind of bringing you joy that you can tell us about?
Yeah, let me start with in terms of media. I absolutely love every season so far of Sex Education, obsessed. I love Grace and Frankie as well. Love that. And then the third show I would say is another one, less known, but really, really, really good. They're in their second season now. It's called P Valley, short for Pussy Valley. It is about Black and Latinx pole dancers and strippers who band together with their queer non-binary club owner to essentially save their club from being demolished and a casino being built. It's set in Chucalissa, Mississippi. And so the creator, Katorian Hall, does just a fantastic job of really teasing out the nuances of what it means to be Black, working class, and also very sexy, to be honest with you, in a space like that, and what it means to use one's sex appeal to direct the gaze, if you will, the GAYS and the GAZE. So the other thing that I will say, I have to agree very much with Rosie. I'm so glad to be back outside in public with folks. In just a week from today, I will be traveling for the first time in 2.5 long years to my beloved London to see, to do some research with some Black poly folk for my book, but also to just see loved ones who I haven't seen in forever. So on that, it might be clear that, I'm very much a part of and have been, in Ballroom for a long time. So one of the other things that I'm very excited to be doing while I'm in the UK is attending another ball. So for those who might be interested in Ballroom, I highly suggest there are a few events that are coming up that I'm aware of. If you look on Instagram and follow an account called Vogue Rights, that's VOGUERITES. They are having what's called a summer takeover. So they'll be popping up all over the city of London with balls. This should be very, very fab. I cannot wait to see so many beloved folks who are part of the scene. So those are a few things that are really giving me an abundance of life. I just cannot wait to be back.
Fantastic. I'm going to sign up for that Instagram account right now and hopefully see you when you're in London, Julian, in a few weeks. That's basically all we've got time for today, I'm afraid. It's been such a fascinating conversation, not just talking about these issues and kind of some of the kind of complexities around them, but also just all these recommendations and where we can go and find more joy and bring that into our lives. And I couldn't echo you all enough as well about how it's also about just being with your loved ones and being with your community and your friends at this time and kind of getting out into the world where you feel safe to do so. So with that, that's all we have time for. So thank you very much to Julian, to Jacob, to Rosie, and to Jonathan, and to the teams at Sage, at the team at Sage for organising and doing everything behind the scenes. I should say that in about 5 days, so next week, or perhaps by the end of this week, you should be able to expect an email with all of those suggestions that you've heard. We'll go through and make sure we've got them all right for you. So yes, thanks very much for attending, and have a great day or evening wherever you are in the world. Appreciate your attendance. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye now.